here tonight and be part of this, experience and bringing back a lot, 1,000 years of history, and that is all about sharing the knowledge that all we have and see how also each of one of us belong to different traditions. But tonight we're gonna be settled or more focused in the indigenous traditions of the Caribbean. It's a big sentence say of the Caribbean, but I choose this this subject because it's very important for every one of us. Be clear with some of the most mishaps that we have, or the ideological terms that we receive from all the past that we have. More related with that, with the heritage of the Arawak, Caribs, and all kind of community people, indigenous people, because normally we don't have, we are not even allowed to connect with all those histories, traditions, and that is all about. Welcome. The space is very special. There is no front. So it's kind of alternative, and I really like it. If you cannot see, I have to find a proper spot so everyone can see. I think it's over here is okay. I'm gonna be pausing a little. So the program of the presentation, we're gonna dedicate the time to explore. I choose several very important cases and examples of how those people, all those communities, societies came from very far or other territories, and why they arrived here, what their interests, what they need as societies, and how was the development, the relationship with the environment, and also between the societies, because they're very different and diverse. I think the first thing that we have to all together is avoid, when we study the indigenous heritage, mostly in all the American continent, is avoid the polar divisions. That happens too much often in the Caribbean. Is only we are settled between Caribs and Arawaks. And we really even didn't know what they really are, because there is opposition between, and the opposition continues because it's something very modern and knowledge is you have to put everything in double, in oppositions. So the Arawaks are more civilized, more quiet, more settled, and the Caribs, they were wild, terrible, cannibals, and all kind of stuff that we are still repeating and repeating, even including me, because sometimes we make those mistakes, and all this is about to change a little bit. In Spanish, I always, when I talk with the communities, I use this sentence. In English, it's in that way. It's from George Orwell, the creator of 1984. All the sentences is the most important for a start is this: history is written by the winners. En Spanish es la historia la escriben los vencedores. Why I start with that? Because all that we want to start talking here is about the relationship between history, narrative, and power. We cannot understand archaeology, sociology, anthropology without attending the power systems, and the historical narrative, are all about power. I divide this sentence always, and when I explain it, because my teachers in my university all the time trying to first history. In the Western set mind is there is only one history, with capital H, of course, no more. Of course, is the history of Europe or the other places. Is written, of course, the only valid evidence is the one is written. So all the Caribs, all the indigenous, all the Oriental tradition that don't have written, is no history, okay? Because history, the main history is written, of course. And by in Spanish it's more easy to explain because the loss is in masculine, loss. The Of course, they are written by men, no woman, no children, no. There is a lot of diversity of histories. There is not written because they were not allowed to do it, or rich people, people for universities, or this. And of course, winners, people who conquer, people who have more money, more knowledge, or more access for information. And so, and more with archaeological records in the history, the past, it's very important to start with that because my position is archaeology, even the division, because no, this is archaeological, this is pre-Hispanic, this is prehistoric, even that is a discrimination. I always say it's history. And even also in English, it's important the difference between history and stories, you know, because I always say in plural, historias, histories, you know, because it's important to understand there is not only one story. Yeah. So more than 6,000 is only a number because you can go more, but in the Caribbean, in all this area, the archaeologists and the historians is more than calculated timing. The range of space is very variable. There is no cell bodies around this superficie of territory. Of course, now we have modern maps. We can see, even with application of the mobile, the territories, how they are. But in the past was very different. Another thing, starting point is this one. The Caribbean, for the inhabitants and the societies of the America, was almost the last lands there were the people coming, you know, because even the first migrators that came from Asia and Polynesia take more than 15,000 years. They take all the way down, even to what is now Chile, Argentina, but the last, digamos, small lands that they came from the Caribbean islands because the environmental or difficulties to reach the islands, of course. It's important also categories, concepts, keywords. Of course, we want to start talking about history, archaeology, the meaning of time, because it's so relative when we are talking about this kind of societies, and also when we are talking about archaeology. Ethnohistory, because also the modern society construct, ethnohistoric is for people who, people of the past, but they always create categories, you know. It's considered ethnohistorical, the studies of the colonialistic societies or of the past of the ethno communities. Of course, race, ethnicity, chronologies, process of interpretation, mestizaje or mestification, archaeological record. This is more the technical words of archaeology is important. We are going to talking about it. Markers of identity. So, in a geographical point or environmental point, if you see here, it's more because you know all the maps are relative. So, this archaeologist Wilson used this kind to represent the distance between the mainlands, you know, from the societies came, the people came, and the how they call it, the lesser or the greatest Antilles. So, 200 kilometers between Mexico and Peninsula Yucatan to Cuba. 125 between the small island of Tobago and Grenada, and 100 kilometers between Florida and the Bahamas. So, the first distance, I mean, the biggest, therefore, these people was reach those first space of lands. One, they came over there, reach and connect with, and also you know that because if you are been traveling here in the Caribbean islands, you know, when you are in a boat or on a ferry, you reach one, or in sailing, you can just jump, even the current flow you. More when you start with Grenada and all the lesser until Puerto Rico is the way normally the societies of the Orinoco used to reach the. So there is another point of view. However, you see it's the same distance, and then we're gonna talk more about it. Also, it's very important to know the environmental consideration of the space, you know, because the last millennials in the Caribbean, there is a lot of changes. Even Tobago was connected, even what now is South America, more than 20,000 years ago. But it's very important the presence of humans create a big change in the environment. Most the extinction of mammals, birds, it was the biggest change when the people started to come to the islands of the Caribbean, and not only because they use all the resources, because also they bring another plants, animals. It's not only when the conquerors or the Spanish or the Europeans came, also there is a lot of more changes, but also in the beginning with these small people, start a big change, environmental change. This is a satellite view from some of the islands. Just for take a little view of the environment, you know there is a lot of the diversity, very dry lands, volcanoes, humidity jungles. I mean, you can find a lot of different environments in these islands, and also that determines in some point the kind of settlements or societies who decide to live there. Because, how you know, even here in what is now San Martin, you also know there is the resources very, very different to Dominica or Guadeloupe. So we're going to start why the archaeologists and how, the more important, how they determine the first migrators on how they figure it out, how determine which kind of people came first, where they come from, and how they can get that, because there is no documents, there is nothing, you know, and the archaeologists have this magic profession. They can take a stone, literally a stone, a crystal, a piece of pottery or ceramic, and they have to, for semen studies they got, to create a story about it, you know, recreate the study, make comparison with one another, the materials, the environment. There is a lot of variables to take on account. So the first places with evidence, there was no pottery, there was no ceramic, only the evidence is settling stones. The first societies, even the first people who came even to American continent, the only thing they left was the weapons built with stones and other kind of artifact, tools, jewelry, all the things they can build reach the stone, and the stone is the most durable material that you can find. So they make some tests, scientific tests to prove the 14 carbonate, and they determine the timing of the evidence. Normally, the first evidence found here because the people also think the first people who came was from what now is Venezuela, Trinidad and Tobago, and the south of South America. But in the decade of the 70s, several studies in the Caribbean Antilles, mostly in Cuba and Hispaniola, what is now Dominicana and Haiti, determined the most long-term evidence in stones, of course, came from the north of South America, but also stone tradition related with Mexican peninsula. They make comparison between the styles of, you see that these are weapons to cut vegetables, but also meats, and more important in the Caribbean, the seashells, which was the most important protein for the people, also the fishing techniques, and all the environments give them. because it's, and how I told you, the stone, this evidence in stones, are the most durable, and also one of the most longest days, because what thing is hard for archaeology is, memorize the timings, because everything they have to calculate, but 4,250 years is one of the most oldest human present evidence in the north of Cuba, or what is now Haiti, also in Hispaniola island. Also, there is very long-term evidence in what is now Bonaire, Curacao, related with the societies in the north, between the north of Venezuela and those islands, because they also were very close. So it's very understable. It was much more reachable for those societies. And of stone weapons, tools, and jewelry belongs to the first evidence of the Lesser Antilles, or these small islands, and also are related between a timing between 4,000, 3,000 years ago. The Litica Rouse is a very famous archaeologist, and they call it people without pottery, because also the pottery, the ceramics, is a very important indicator of the development of the societies. So also the archaeologists use the category prehistoric or Stone Age people, because also normally people use those considerations for mark the timing of the societies. But something is very important for the archaeologists is the style, and when the people not only use the stone for common use, for break a seashell or reach something, is decorative. When the people start to think in aesthetics, and now we figure it and connect it with art and with ideology and then with religion, is how they can maybe have some consideration about how was the society, the culture of the people, and so on. Casimirian is one of the oldest style, very common in the Great Antilles, but also you can find it in islands like Barbados. I'm going to tell you the names of the places, just the next ones. Also, the archaeologists call this timing between 6,000 and 2,000 years ago Paleo-Indian. It depends the tradition of the archaeologists you read, because if they are North American, they call it in another way, if they're European, or they're Latin Americans. But normally these societies were hunters and recollectors of what the nature gives them in the moment and the season, using normally the fishing techniques, and because there is not much big animals in the island. So the most common use was the seafood and what they think. This one is also is in the Museum of Antigua. It's a very specific kind of an aesthetic of tool of made of stone. Now at this point, the archaeologists have some discussion about the timing, but the most the accurate time is between 2,000 years before Christ, is when the really start continuous, because the thing is continuous migration and travel of the people of South America to the island, because in the past they can be exploring or someone very close to nearby islands like Trinidad and Tobago or Curacao, what is now these islands, but in that time the society of the Amazonian societies and cultures, they, for some reasons, they are going to discuss a little further, it's very hard to determine why, because we are not, but there is some archaeologists very specialized in the Amazonian, they study the reasons, maybe possible reasons why the people of the Amazonas, the Orinoco River nearby, they decide pull over all the way to the north to the Caribbean islands. There is some names of important ceramic plates in the Lesser Antilles. There is one called Cluster Crum Bay in St. Thomas. St. Thomas is very important because it's one of the small islands before the greatest Antilles, Puerto Rico, you know, and it's a connection point what is now the United States Virgin Islands. Sugar factory appeared in St. Kitts. The longest term, the places, the oldest is between 2000 and 2200. Hope State here in San Martin is one very important place because you can find in those places several layers of material and with different timing. So of all the island is one of the most important because that place should be important for the people who live there because they stay in different times, settle or visit in that place. The oral tradition in Antigua, the last picture that I show you, and one called Jolly Beach. This one also is very important. Is in Antigua and Barbuda also is an interaction area. We want to see because for archaeologists it's very important the interaction because there is some islands that are more totally for settlement, but other ones like is now even in this moment of the history, you know, there is island of the Caribbean where the people are more settling, other ones so the people have more movement, or there is some ports or the commercial you know, these movements, even that we have now, we can see it also represented in the past. So we get the interaction time was between 3,000 years and 2,000 years, lesser and greater Antilles, because here comes another of the most difficult point to put together some archaeology. Some archaeologists defend the theory that most of the people came from the South America to the Antilles, and others say there was people already in the Greater Antilles like Cuba, Hispaniola, and they came tradition together little by little because it's not the time, the history how we know now. That time was very, very slow process and graduating between centuries and centuries of interaction, small interaction. The people was developing exchanges and another because the cultural exchange, the archaeologists can take the cultural exchange when they found tradition of stones or pottery and ceramics of the belongs of another places. Why I found this kind, the belongs, what is now Guyana, here in Haiti. That's why, because their people was trading all the time because they need this kind of exchange, cultural exchange or social exchange. So the technology integration also is very important. It's not only, there is another way to find where they belong, this tradition. Some archaeological early archaic, another was pre-ceramic, but the most important point of this period between 2,000 years is the Saladoid, what they call it the Saladoid phenomenon, the Barrancoid style of pottery. Because it's the most stable archaeological register that we have in all the Caribbean as pottery, and it's the most crucial evidence for the people in the past and now to see, okay, these islands were together with South America, but also in the further years they figured out that also traditions came from Florida and also the Gulf of Mexico also came to the Greater Antilles and create something new. But this one came, this very specific ceramic tradition came from the Orinoco River mostly. There is huge recognized archaeological Brumer, Keegan, Bruce, Crucian, who was working several decades of years with these traditions. It's important that you see in true color because even the archaeologists have a name called WAR. It's W for white, O for over, red, WAR. It's called this kind of very specific pottery. the shape of the basil. And you also ask them, this kind of pottery development also is totally connected with societies who in some point develop also intensive agriculture or some kind of agriculture, because some people don't figure out, but if they have this kind of artifacts, objects, it's because they need to put something inside. You know, it's so simple like that. In your kitchen, you need to put the beans, the vegetables, and put it in the fridge. But imagine that people in that time, they also need for a lot of kind of use. It's not only for the food, it's also like burials. They don't have modern coffee, so they create also in some places big. So the uses are very diverse. But the Saladoid people, and now is one you have to connect it with the term Arawaks, because archaeologists talk in a language and historians talking another. Saladoid, Barrancoid, all what archaeologists call like tradition of technology all came off for a big root of tradition and cultural heritage called what we call now Arawaks. But the same Arawaks have different kind of societies inside. The thing is that archaeologists cannot determine these subtle or biggest differences only in the archaeological record. I mean, if they find another potter with another kind of color, they may say, no, this maybe belongs to another kind of people because they don't want to use more the red, they want to use yellow or orange, you know. But the Barrancoid people mostly, the Arawaks, if you can call it that way, I use the archaeological term too, you can have another point of view. They came from the Orinoco River, who is one of the biggest rivers in South America, connect with Amazonian, even with in the most beginning of the river with what is now Brazil. So it's very important study. There is a very important archaeologist called Donald Laytrap, Irving Roos, in the Amazonian. They defend the theory. They all came directly from the Amazonian. And there is another tradition of archaeologists like Betty Meyers, Sanoja Vargas. They also say, okay, they came from the Orinoco Delta, but also for the north of Venezuela and Colombia also have a simultaneous migration of Arawaks people. But the most important is the people of the Orinoco River. First, because they have a very high development system of navigating in this big river. So they have centuries and thousands of years of technology developed, knowing the currents of the river, when it's up, when it's down. So when I can imagine when those people saw the delta of the Orinoco, I want to show you in the now that this is the delta of the Orinoco River. This is closer. There is big connection of small rivers that all determine there. And if you can see, this is a satellite view now. Also, you have to know that in the past, like 5,000, 3,000 years ago, was more wide because you know now it's drier. But it's an image that you can see. So you can see the delta of the Orinoco. They came from here down, and it's like a big jump. And some people are describing it when they take up to the Atlantic, because connect directly with the Atlantic. Here down is Guyana, Suriname, you know, and here is Trinidad and Tobago. Just if you see it like a puzzle, you can put Trinidad and Tobago facing here in the corner of Venezuela. So these societies were connected. This place is very special, most the island of Tobago. So we are like putting together the traditions. So the lower Amazonas and the middle Orinoco were very important at this time, like 2,500 sorry, it's before Christ, you know, it's AC, BC, but it's before Christ. The Orinoco was very complex and diverse place. There's thousands of societies. There is, what I'm telling you from the beginning is avoid the image of there is two societies, Caribs and Arabs. No, there was a lot of people with different interests and with different options to go. The Leitra, the archaeologist of the Amazonian, he said the thing was in the Amazonian what we believe, because let me put a picture. I don't have a, now the Amazonian is a new trend again for the fire, but in that time, even now, people think the Amazonian is a magnificent jungle, evergreen, and it is for the species of there. But for humans, it's a total nightmare. For humans, you know, if you put me there or each one of there, we can die in just 1 week because it's very difficult. So the societies who even still living now, they have to figure it out very good to survive there because the level of acidity, the soil is very acid. You cannot, the acidity level is very high. You cannot grow, put a seed or whatever, and they don't gonna grow. All the forest gonna, also the sun is all in the top of the big trees, down. So that was one of the reasons for the biggest concentration of people. The population was growing, the soil in some point was devastated for some big level, so the people decided to find another land. So what they go for the north of Venezuela and Colombia and for the Caribbean in that time, between 2000, because even the mandioca yucca, who is the most important Amazonian plant because it's the only one who can resist, you know, the acidity level of the soil. Even that plant needs a lot of caring in that moment. I bring here one. I don't know why they put here some kind of plastic or, but this is the yucca. It's the root. It's the most important root in the people use it in that moment for alimentation. Not the only one, but the most important because it's a very important carbohydrate. You know, give you a lot of calories when you eat it. And they can, hunting animals, they put the protein, the little protein with the but takes a lot, also takes a lot of effort for the people getting grown. So they have to cut a lot of trees, put it, and it was not easy. So the another way for archaeologists and anthropologists figure out the tradition of the Arawaks, or even the name of Arawak and Carib came for linguistic studies, because there is some long-term linguistic traditions of the languages that still having in the Amazonian, in Venezuela, Colombia, in the Caribbean, not in the Caribbean, but in the continental South America. You see the blue ones are even now the Arawak's roots languages that you can find in the South America. And the red ones are the Carib tradition of linguistics that you can find in the continental of Venezuela, Colombia. The origin was also the forest of Brazil. But in Colombia and Venezuela, we still, even in Suriname, Guyana, a lot of Carib languages. So there is another way to find to find the diversity of this tradition, because those people are still living. So they connect, the linguistic studies connect the traditions, and it's another way. But the archaeologists looking for another kind of evidence, like the pottery, the more important. Here we go again, Hope State San Martin have another very important Saladoid place. That one is like 100 meters for the sea level and 2 kilometers for the sea, you know. And how I was telling you, there is multiple occupation of that place. There is another tradition very important. It's called wet pottery, and we're gonna talk about this then. In Puerto Rico, there is an important archaeologist called Venezuelan in the 17th decade. He studied a lot this moment in 2,000 years, coming now to this century. This is very smart, but this map, when I send you the image, you can find the earliest saladoid places in the Lesser Antilles, in the small islands. You will not see it here, but he marked in black the saladoid places. So he started here, of course, in the corner between Venezuela and Trinidad and Tobago, and they go the continent. One very important place for Versteeg was a Dutch archaeologist. He studied a place, it's one of the most important golden rock in San Eustatius, because in archaeological terms, there is mostly two kinds of excavation or studies. One, they try to find the middle points, you know, and dive down and found different kind of records. The another kind of, ¿verdad? Is large section of excavations, so big areas. These archaeologists do it in that place, and he discovered patterns of settlements, and they even evidence how were put together the houses. You know, the little towns that some people decide to establish was now San Eustatius, and so it's very important for the close by islands that point, because he using the spatial reference, they draw the kind of houses that people should live with the materials for the moment. And if you compare, he made a comparison with the way the people settle still now in the Amazonian is the same. You know, it's a central house communicated with another small houses, so it's a interactive and central societies places. There is another very important places like Mazabel in Puerto Rico, St. Thomas, Francis Montserrat, which have the same kind of central point with related houses. Also, in familiar, you know, when you try to figure out how they socialize, it's very important for archaeologists know the way of the houses were put together, because it's the first evidence of organized hierarchy societies. That is the next step in the beginning of this moment of these traditions, is that step. The past to be only dispersed houses to be settled and related houses in several places. Puerto Rico, what is Puerto Rico now, is one of the most important. This place called Mazabel is very important because he shows between 600 and 1200 after Christ demonstrate a constant presence of population and also graveyards, ritual places. In that moment, the population was going, you know, with there is a lot of evidence the population was going up for the graveyard, for the way they were settled. So, why Puerto Rico? Why Hispaniola? Why Cuba? Because those islands, of course, they have more wide, more space. Also, there is people who you know, 4,000 years ago was exploring, so there is a lot of heritage, more the Salvador people, so they create a big diversity society with different levels and stay alive. I put another image here important for the Carib's traditions nearby the islands of the central north of South America, Curaçao, Bonaire, the north of Venezuela, even a small island like San Vicente and Grenadines. All these islands were more influenced by the Caribs. in different kind of Carib societies. They were more, the evidence show more specialized this kind of artistic or religious or another kind of image, because for archaeologists it's very difficult sometimes say what were the use of this image. And there is a lot of thesis studies in my country about this image, because in the beginning they thought is decorative. But decorative of what, you know, because it can be very, so in some point people say no, it's the Pachamama or the great goddess. But in the end, show another step of the development, or also ideological. And in the Lido Islands of the north of Venezuela, you can find thousands, hundreds of these small feminine images. So also they dare to say these societies were more related with the female power or another kind of familial relationship or hierarchies. So, but because there is not too much of the north, this area. What is the difference between Saladoy? Because this is very important. People get really confused because countries like Cuba, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, mostly Puerto Rico, for difference, to make a difference between Arawaks is something very ambiguous. Why? You will never know. So archaeologists try to study this ethnicity phenomenon because it's more related with identities of population. They researched very ancient pottery. That was the highest point of cultural development, mostly in the Hispaniola island, and was between this timing was the rising of this tradition, what we people call or still calling Taino. Taino is if we came back a little, is the combination, you know, of the societies, Saladoy societies, with the traditions who have more than 4,000 years living in the Greater Antilles, on the big islands. So when the societies grow up, when they more hierarchy levels, and when they develop more religious kind of identity, they, because it's very important to know where it came, because another thing is how the Spanish called them after the colonization called them the people. Yeah. So we have to be very careful about that, because in the end it depends how the tradition connect and know where they belong. That's why sometimes archaeology is a little more objective, I don't know if I call it that way, because they only say, no, this is technology. Because the states, the governments, even the same people can call themselves in different ways. So this is another point to discuss after. The case of Jamaica is very important and very particular, because was one of, that doesn't mean that wasn't people before in Jamaica, but the big migration of people of the another Great Antilles to Jamaica occurred in that timing. So can you imagine for those people go to that island more wide, more than 130 kilometers wide, with another kind of vegetation, animals. Of course, the biologists also found that biggest small mammals extincted because was very aggressive the use for each of these animals. But in the end, Jamaica, the big migration of the Saladoids and the Arawaks was in the beginning of that time for the evidence, archaeological evidence. And what they call post-Saladoid societies and all another, if you read archaeology of Cuba, Puerto Rico, they're going to call Taino societies. But some archaeologists call post-Saladoid societies. The more development, you can find things, competition of lineages, individual connection with the familiar heritage. The Semis phenomenon is very important in a religious way. And the plazas. Plazas is the big places with political status for the people. We're gonna see it next. This is the semis. Semis is a ritual, very specific kind of image related with graveyards and also like the representation of the familiar heritage and lineage. It's very important because they pass to be a community, a big white community, a big community to say I belong for this tradition and I'm marked for this kind of heritage. Sometimes they choose animals, sometimes they choose human figures or a mix of animal with human, because another thing for archaeology says, if I see that image now, I can see can be a monkey, can be a human, can be a dead people, you know? Our appreciation is totally different of that people. Maybe that people is the face of God, but now for us, for some people, religion can say God is white and have a big white beard. So it's extremely relative. So this point, also with the feminine figure that I showed you before, these ones, in some point in my country, they say, no, it's the Venezuelan Venus. So even archaeologists say that. So Venus is an image for Europe, for the central tradition. So even that, you have to be careful because it's like you make comparison with the reference that you have, and it's very difficult to reach the mindset of the people who create that image. So. And these another kinds. Excuse me, there is a lot of time for put all the reference, but this belongs for the main Isabel place of Puerto Rico, who have the most important evidence of this kind of image. And when we pass to the colonial time, this is the settlement of the plazas. So they have like a big stage, how the archaeologists call it. So the other places are distributed for the central square, and it's a very high, can you imagine like a mall, but it's now or a big cultural center. So it's the comparison that people do now because it's the reference that we have. But normally these kind of artifacts are related with religious and mythological and like identity, familiar, hierarchy positions. So not all the people can carry with a semi, or so that's why archaeologists try to find this kind of image or object, because they demonstrate these societies, they create ideological levels of social relationship, power relationship. This family can be related with this island, or that belongs to that island. That is the big work they have to do. So let's gonna take it at this time because for some people, because it's a big long history, this time is gonna take a whole session. But before the conquered times, this was the highest level societies, because you maybe know about Mexico, Peru, and other places in South America, they were different history. The north of South America was very similar to what's happening in the Caribbean. We have very complex societies with heritage, with familiar, and with another phenomenon is important is the cacique phenomenon. I think that you ever hear the word cacique. Cacique is how the conqueror called the leaders of the societies, you know, the chief of the societies. But is only a name, because every island or society has different ways to call the leaders. Also there is female leaders, but they call it, it's very, very complex. Yeah. So this was the major routes of navigation for the Europeans. Maybe already you know the different travel, the first travel who made Colombia and the different islands and places. One of the first was Bahamas in the White North. So that's gonna take, because I'm very interested more in what comes now is like the center of my, impulse to do this is try to find again against the theory, because it's not only a theory, it's a statement. The Arawaks were extinct, there is no Arawaks anymore. Conquered times, no Arawaks, no Caribs anymore. There is no indigenous heritage in the Caribbean, because some people are still saying that even now. So we're gonna talk not now to explain about the conquered. No, we're gonna be talking what happens and the options they have these societies to survive in that times. What time is it? Sorry.
So you're saying there's no more Caribs, no more traces anymore?
No, this is exactly what I fight against. People think that, and the historical position for so many years was that they are extinct. They don't exist anymore after the conquest started, And what I'm trying to explain is there is not that way, because there is too many options to that people in that time to survive, and the strategies they take in that time. So, of course, was true, the more than 80 or the 90% of the people have a big impact. In just 30 years, in the beginning of the contact, diseases like smallpox, influenza, yellow fever. And another point is important. The people think it's because they work together. No, even the far present of the Spanish or the English in some point also bring disease to the island. Because you have to think in the medieval society was finishing in Europe. Those people have been suffering with a lot of diseases. I mean, they were chemical bombs, every one of them, because they don't have to worry for weapons, swords, or whatever, because they were in contact with the Arabs, with the very far India, China, the black disease. That is the major cause of the reversal. And plus the disease, you can find the starvation, economic collapse, because the people were very sick. They were working in the plantation, no more yuca, no more mandioca, no more cassave, no more. So the conucos or cultivation plots were abandoned, and some riots. So it was a very hard time for these societies, mostly for the ones who were more developed, in the Great Antilles, like Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, because they depend totally for the agriculture model. They destroy the agriculture model, no more society. But the Caribs in the lesser islands have more options. They can move, they can find food in another island, or the colonial system created like a kind of apartheid. It's called compartmentation agreement under those with the Spaniards. Was also complex. Another important thing that you have to discuss is what is related with we say in the beginning. The history is written by the winners. The starting point for this theory or statement to say the Arawaks were extinct or the indigenous were extinct in the islands was created by Gonzalo Fernandez de Oviedo, a colonialistic administrator who traveled mostly for the Caribbean Antilles and sent studies to Europe. Who say he stayed several months and years in Puerto Rico, seeing the places and the society, and he said informs to Spain to say, no, there is no more indigenous in this place, and because there is studies also what was the road he made in Puerto Rico. He only stayed what is Ponce now. But Puerto Rico also is big island, a big jungle. Even now it's very green. Of course, the indigenous run away how they could do. Another die, but of course another ones go far away of there. Or you think the other indigenous just say, we have to wait to start here? No. So but the forms of Oviedo are very important for the historical point of view who say the Arhuas were totally extinct in that moment. These kind of drownings also were made by Oviedo, are very important because reflect, you know, the aesthetics of how they look the houses of the Arhuas in that moment. And there is the patterns of interaction, you know, with the societies, Caribs and Arhuas. It was a moment that was only ship-based trade. I mean, the big ships came for the islands. They made like agreement with the Caribs or with the Arhuas or the Cacique or how they call it, and they take fresh water, food, and they run away to another. They call it the indigenous survival versus the total genocide, because also they can say that it's a total genocide, everyone dies for the diseases, so there is another thing. Like in the beginning, of course, the official history takes as direct, you cannot deny this document. It's like they are sacred for the modern history of the past century. They are sacred. All they read in there is the total truth. You cannot say no. So the writings of the chronicles of the colonial times, you know, and there is a lot of things about it. So we should ask who read in the official documents, you know, because these documents only were written by administrators, of course, priests, a lot of priests, Catholic priests mostly. You know, their point of view was totally focused in the colonization model. Yeah. So we take those, it's very absurd in the moment. The Dominican researcher take this document and say, no, this is the truth. It's totally, of course, it's the truth for that human being in that moment. You know, at that time, but under his ideology. But you cannot apply for describe all the history of a big population of people. And for me also it's very important the image they create, because the image in the modern society have a big impact in the social perception, in the social image. This artist, Theodore de Bry, was the biggest influencer of this kind of engraving. And you cannot find it in the archaeological records, so was an image ideological creation of this statement. Another of the important point is, of course, the indigenous culture was the mother culture. They have more than 5,000 years living in these territories. They know the environment, they know the techniques of the making of the lands, how to approach the seafood. So people just think the Europeans came and that's it. They create a new culture, and there is no in the two ways. Of course, there is a receptive culture, active culture, how you can call it, but you cannot erase the base of the Latin American and American culture is the floor. The main floor is, of course, all kinds of indigenous in the different places. High in the colonies, 17th century, they create this kind of catalogation of people. And I focus a lot in the image because it's very important in the impact they have in the ideology of the people. So, I would say they create this catalogation, of course, because in the colonial time, there is a lot of changes in the societies, the mix between white Europeans with men or women of the colonies. They have child, of course, thousands, hundreds, millions of child with different origins. But another very important point is normally the mestiçage was between the male European with indigenous women. And guess what? Even the sexuality even is not studied totally in that term, because we are still thinking, no, even the archaeologists and the anthropologists or the historians say they don't study too much these cases. There is not too much. It's very important because they think, no, there is a mestizo, moreno, descendant of this combination, but guess what? Normally the culture was who totally raised these children? The white man or the indigenous woman? Or the black woman, how you want to call it? Was the man or was the woman? If she belongs from an indigenous society, even if, of course, the culture is a highest percent of her and another percent of her. It's not totally from him, never. Because in our societies, the mother heritage is more important. You can see it in all America. So, if the man is making business or whatever he do, all the culture, even the language, normally of the tradition were passed by the black woman or the indigenous, and then the complicity was even hard, more, because even they catalogized in like more than 30 matches of between black descendants of black with indigenous. It was a total, the colonial administration, mostly in Spain, they take care a lot of this for control the society in that moment. And they give like position for the degree you have in your race in that moment. But the major point is that, I mean, it's something very logical. The culture is more passed for the mother tradition to the child. Even the mitochondrial DNA studies in Puerto Rico, I can send you the link of that, match in more than 80% with related indigenous genetics of South America. Like I say 80%, the 80% is the cases with the people at least have 1/3, 20 or 30% in their genetics related with the South American genetics, Suriname, Guyana, Venezuela, or Brazil. So even the scientific studies demonstrate even the people who is totally mixed now and with different cultural races have a percentage of indigenous heritage. It's not only in the blood, it's in the culture also. This is another, I like very much the graphic of Wilson, an archaeologist. He in this graphic, I cannot explain all, but he demonstrates the interaction in the centuries between the Caribs, English, French, and Dutch societies in the Caribbean. So it's very interesting if you see it properly after, how work in different islands, the contact between the societies, no? More in the Lesser Antilles with the Carib societies. Because normally they know more about, it's more reading about the Arawaks and the Taino because the biggest societies run there. I bring only one example, different cases that happen in the Lesser Antilles with the Caribs. There is a colonial case of Luisa de Navarrete. He was a mestiza woman, yeah? Between these years, 1576, she was living in one of the corners of Puerto Rico. What happened in that time was there is different ways of the Carib societies still living in the small islands of the Caribbean, like Montserrat, more Dominica. Dominica even is one, and San Vicente were the most high Carib heritage. But what they do, they wrapped it even when there is lack of the slaves, riots, they contact them and they bring it to the islands. And people think the only people who travel around the island were also the conquerors. Of course, no, the pirates, the Caribs, a lot of communication between the islands. But Europeans and indigenous captives, they were incorporated to some Carib societies in the Barbados, Dominica, the small islands nearby to the north of South America. In San Vicente also, so they create the Caribs. The people think, no, they were wild, they were cannibals, but they, of all the societies, they were the more strategic societies, or more on this island, because they take care, if one European or one people, even indigenous Arawaks of the other islands, don't want to live anymore, or they don't want to be in Puerto Rico, another island, they take them to those small islands. And they create a very diverse society in those moments. So another kind of colonialism, well, you can imagine, the English were more focused in the Lesser Antilles and the lowdowns. Also the French way of colonization. We're going to talk more about that when we talk in the next, the Afro-Caribbean presentation, how was this kind of relationship. But the Lesser Antilles, the lowdown, were very competitive for the European racing nations, like Tobago Island. It passed for the Spaniards, then the Dutch, then the English. I mean, was very focused in those small islands because the Spaniards have mostly the control of the Greater Antilles. So another time, I want to focus in that because, like in my country, in other countries, what happened is all the history is focused in the independence times. So also in these times, the indigenous or mulatto, mestizo population were very important to the independence fight against the European in that moment. Of course, with the most high level of the people who give the life, I tell you for my country, was the descendants of the slave and the descendants of indigenous, so all kind of people at that moment. So I'm closing the last example that I want to bring about this theory of the extermination of if the conquerors don't finish the extermination of the indigenous, the national states in the last century, they do it, totally do it. Because the ideological changes in the Latin American countries like Mexico, Argentina, I mean all the countries between the 40 decade and the 50 decade, they were very focused and create a society, a modern society. So they figured out in that moment, of course, we have a lot of Afro-Caribbean descendants. We have a lot of people mestizo from the Arawaks, Caribs, another kind of indigenous. So we have to create a statement, we are all mestizos. So they take, mestizo is people, brown, what I call it in the most racist way, the brown people. You know? I'm a mestizo. You know, I mix a lot of things, but I cannot allow, I tell you because in my country the passport like this, I will not say I'm not black, I'm not indigenous, I'm mestizo. You know, like an homogeneous kind of human being. Yeah. So I'm not have root with indigenous, I don't have root with the Afro-Caribbean, with the Afro-slave. So the case of Dominican is very, very, very representative because even now, if you know people of Dominican Republic, you say, Taino, or, you know, they say, what? Even, not all the levels, but the statement is, we are morenos, we are mestizos, we are a mix. Or a mix of what, is my question. So, they create a myth of the miscegenation and has a state ideology. It happens in most of the countries of South America also. This is the cultural mark of Puerto Rico, and in the 50s there is a big discussion because they say, how you put an indigenous there? Because it was the symbol of the cultural movement of Puerto Rico in that moment. A slave, a Spanish, and an indigenous. It was a big controversial because the white people of Puerto Rico, they say, you have to take it off. You don't have to put it. the indigenous, because in some countries they say, yeah, because they cannot deny the Afro heritage. So they want to erase the indigenous because it's the most difficult to reach, but exists. So in countries like Mexico, we call it in Spanish, muerte al indio vivo y vida al indio muerto. So they create big monumental, big statues. Oh, they were the indigenous, the warriors. But, like in my country, in Brazil, we are still having a lot of societies of indigenous, but the state, I'm talking about the state get focused. No, in the past we have in Mexico the warrior, the Maya, the calendar, but they're still having a lot of society indigenous. No, they are not important, So that's why I say day to the living Indian and life to the So for finish, another thing is who receives what, African and European culture have to adapt also to the environment, context, take the local cultures. So in some point, it's also common say the European become a little indigenous in the territory because they have to adapt to and what they take as reference, the people who in the past was living there. Where they settle the cities? In the place where the people are still living. I mean, they only came and adapt and they use their resources and bring another resources. Was an interaction. Was not they create something totally new. So I take a little photos of Puerto Rico in the 50 decade. It's very important because the same objects that you say that the wooden, the stick for the corn and for the yuca, they're still using even now. So you go to a campesino land, a farmer land in my country, and another, people are still using these tools. It doesn't mean they are primitive or that. It's the culture, the indigenous heritage they have. So, for finish, because I think it's enough. I bring up some of the photographs of them, like examples, how even now you can see the heritage now, even the last year, this year, and what I'm doing in photography is kind of that, is relate the people with the tradition. We have, I see it in the north islands of my country, like Margarita Island, Blanquilla Island, nearby to the Antilles. The fishers still having this kind of knowledge about the islands. They say, I came from Blanquita, I came from islands, they say like 400 kilometers far away, and they go only for fishing in a day trip. And you can say, are you crazy? Because it's the same what the people do it in the past. So they take long of the boats, because now they have motor, of course, but the way and the representation they have of the sea, the land, is a heritage of the indigenous and plus the Caribs and plus the Afro. I mean, everything is still living out there. It's not only, you cannot only say, no, it's only one culture, it's the heritage of all of this. They make like big groups, and I can imagine in the past, those fishers do the same, they rotate the times and this and that.
Are they taking the same routes?
The slab, because it's the current. And also the Arawaks navigator and the Caribs know the current, because otherwise they're going to get more in that time, because the river in that time were more wild, so the currents were more different. I mean, only following this man, who is a recollector of seashells and pulps and another animal who live, I mean, it's the same with indigenous were doing like 5,000 years ago. So the same techniques, the same places, the same animals. I mean, you see the flock. This is in the north part of the island.
And where is that, in Venezuela?
All of this in the north of Venezuela, Margarita Island. So also The another point that we're gonna talking more the next week is the phenomenon with the Catholicism. Because the indigenous societies also, okay, you put me the marriage virgin, but you can see in Mexico case is another representation they create with the combination of cultures. In the Margarita Island, we have a festival of the Virgin of the Valle Virgin.
Who's that saying?
You see, it's in Margarita Island, Venezuela. It's a virgin in September. So the fishermen make la procession in the canoas, in the raft, through the islands. They go island to island with the image, with the families, and it's like a blessing for the work they do. You know, it's a communitary exchange. So there is another reference. You see, the islands are quite similar. This is one of the archaeological places in Margarita Island. This is a big deposit of seashells, you know, because the people also trash the seashells. They put it together in only one place and they create like a big hill of the people that we. This artifact is a gubia. It's created with seashells. I think that, I don't know if you have one here. This is very important because the archaeologists study them and they determine one of the biggest tools to create the raft, because they take big woods and they don't have, of course, they don't have metallic, knives. So they make it very sharper to make the raft. There is a raft out there. You can see it. So they still found it there. Also decorative and necklace make it with seashells. This is a colonial place, one of the first settlements of the Spaniards in Venezuela. It's in Cubagua Island. It's still the ruins of the island because they cannot live there more than 10 years, but it's still the place. So that is a reference. In Colombia and Venezuela, we're still having a big influence of the Arawaks. Even there in Colombia, there is the Arawakos, the Yucpa in Venezuela and Colombia. They've been staying with them, and of course with the languages, techniques of fishing. This is the Yucpa society in the north between Venezuela and Colombia. It's the most northern Carib culture. We're still living with language, genetics, all completely together. So that's it. This is some of the reference. Samuel Wilson is one of the biggest references to study this. Also, that book I can send you via email. If you leave the email down, I can send it. So the major of the reference are of these books. They are in digital, so I can share it. And that's it. I think it's enough.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Antonio Carmona from the University of St. Martin.
Okay.
I want to congratulate the organizers of this event. This is beautiful, very significant, very important, and I was very excited that we have a full week to reflect upon Indigenous and African, our backgrounds. And there was one comment that I had concerning the DNA test that we did in Puerto Rico, where they said it was 80% that we had Indigenous. And there's this debate in Puerto Rico that after the independence, especially in Venezuela, we received lots of immigrants, and these immigrants had more Indigenous than the Puerto Ricans. So that was like after 1800, then we became more Indigenous through that. And a lot of people in Puerto Rico, they try to emphasize the Indigenous to forget about the African.
Okay.
And what I liked about your presentation was that it's not either or. Even though we're talking about Indigenous, we're not talking about only Taino, but the other ones. And I think that's very important for St. Martin, because to this day, I don't know who called St. Martin Swaliga, and I don't know who called St. Martin Walichi.
And according to that, it's very important also to know there is, even now, with the Caribbean, I think the Caribbean Sea is the most affluent with migration all the time. And you cannot have hard position about the belonging of the people for a long time, because there is always variables in the map. And you see it now, even now, right now, migration happening everywhere, every time. So the self-centered mentalities are not available in the Caribbean anymore because like that, even with the scientific test, you can find this diversity. And also, with what also happened with the genetics, and more important, when the countries made, I don't what say in English, census. How you say in English?
The census.
Okay. How say the people? In some countries, it's so funny because they say the people auto-catalogize. They put options, The people, you're mestizo, you are Afro-descendant, you are European descendant. And sometimes the ideological is so hard that in some moment of the history, you prefer to catalogize yourself as Afro-descendant because maybe you have support of the government. But sometimes you have discrimination, or sometimes it's better. In my country, it's happening now. It's better to say, no, I'm indigenous, and the government at some point give you lands in some place. So it's strategic say, I'm from the community, and there is a lot of clearly European descendants who say, no, we're indigenous. And of course, in some moment the government gives them lands. And it's so, it's so relative, the ideological changes all the time is you have to take it in count. Comments? Questions? Anecdotal memory, something. I mean, I focus more in my personal research. I focus more in the religious and rituals because for me they are melting pots, and also they are the way you can see even now how the people configure in an ideological way and how they link it together, because when we are talking about the Afro-Caribbean, it's more complex because there is a lot of differences. And the first, like we say today, the first is avoid the dualism. Say Caribs, Arawaks, with the Afro-Caribbean, the difference is you cannot say, because also, even now, the people say, no, they were Africans. And they think the African is the North to South Africa, the slaves were the same. And if you don't study, if in my country they came mostly for what is now Togo and Congo, and they were very different to the Nigerian, what is now Nigeria. I mean, even people don't realize that. And of course, in some moment, the Portuguese and then mix up the Afro-descendant, but in some countries wasn't the same way, and also the French way, the English way of colonization, the Spanish, did total different. So I always like to say there is only a way to start the studies and get deep and deep and deep, because in this kind of terms you never go the total true of, and also you have to avoid that. Try to find the total, it's the options that you can reach.
Sorry, there's another question. Is the same? Is that
The Virgin of the Valle. Is the Mother Mary, valley, the valley of the Margarita Island. It's a valley.
Right.
So it's the same Immaculada Conception, the Conception Virgin, but they call it Virgin of the Valley because they would bring to the valley of Margarita Island. But for the fishermen, more related because there is even a big society called Carib people of Margarita Island. They don't speak anymore the natural language, but they relate really with the culture. So even the genetics, you see the people is totally, in the way they live, they are white people, they don't speak anymore the language. So they take another days, this is the Catholic celebration, digamos, the mestizo celebration, but they take the next days and make their own white festivals about the same image. And the fishermen all, of course, how I always say in my country, forget this is never the same image that you can find in Europe. Forget it totally about it, neither with the Santeria in Cuba, with all the kind of images they were putting together in the different societies is totally different. I only bring this because it's the very characteristic with the fishermen in the island.
So just an observation, this movement of people, you could say it's still going on. It's still going on.
Yeah.
Always.
I think it's something even energetical of the Caribbean is always movement. And people, even the short time they have been here in this island, I realized that a lot of people were family, relatives in Curacao, for economics, for whatever, but always there is a change of population and people, and in some point you say, okay, it's the way of it's built this place and this society. And also, finish is important. The total population of the Caribbean is, in comparison with other regions of the world, is very small, like less than 50 millions. But the cultural exchange and the things that we sell to the world is big. You know, the influence, the music, the cuisine, so it's also very important in that. So, okay? Okay, we can remember the email for send these images, the books, and
I have a remark. I was, when I went to school in the 50s, I was born on Aruba, grew up on Aruba, so I knew Dutch history, geography, and you learn like the Rijn komt bij Lopik in Ontsland Italy, where the Rhine entered the Netherlands.
okay.
And that was my vision then.
Okay.
Later on, I start to, you read different books, and I realized the word history for me means his story. And it was usually a male person, the colonizer or whoever it was, whichever story you read, it was that person's story.
That person.
And it made a complete difference of the way you look at and understand history.
Yes. Because it's very important. Because also for can study this heritage of the Afro-Caribbean and indigenous societies.
Yeah.
Now the most important is what the historian call oral history.
Yeah.
Because even the now societies, the transmission of the history is totally oral, verbal.
Yes.
And it's the only way, because people, even most in the North and South America, they think no, also there is no indigenous, now they are mixed, but if you talk with the campesinos, with the farmers
Yeah.
in the nearby islands, you realize, you really go deep in the oral history, their traditions, the way, the philosophy about the time, about the way they relate with the women, with the family, even the way the family is put together, the relationship with the neighbor, with the cousin, you can make the person and you can find this influence, these identities, and be totally open to know that every person, every society build the history. The history. But the problem is, my only problem is when they want to, put it like the only truth is this. This book is the history. This ideology is the history. There is nothing else. So even your grandma, your neighbor, have a history also. They contribute to the major vision.
At those times, we just accepted it. We have to make schools aware that they have to really research who wrote that book and their point of view and have their own point of view.
Exactly.
Yeah.
With Oviedo and the painter is very specific example because you see how even a human being can build a total image of millions of thousands of people in one historical moment. So in the future we'll do.
So, Mr. Escalona, if you were to tell us, hey, a little preview of next week,
Okay.
what we are.
The next week I didn't bring the next week we're gonna talking about is more about, it's not quite historical like this one, you know, it's more related how the Afro-Caribbean communities and the studies of the last century, most of the last century, the 60 decades, and the social movements create a new interpretation of the Afro-Caribbean heritage. And also more related with my experience in Venezuela because we have a big Afro-Caribbean movement now because the people realize they have to defend their heritage. So I bring this example with the religious because I focus more always in the religions like Santeria, Voodoo, Spiritism in my countries, have as example of cultural diversity and how these societies were protecting in those systems some several centuries and years. So it's historical also, but more bring it to this because we cannot sell it only in the colony. That's I'm gonna take a little view of that.
Okay, thank you very much for coming out tonight. It's much
Thank you.
appreciated. Thank you